Montana Territory, August 1877. The sun had barely crested the Bitterroot Range when Sheridan Zeller stepped off the stagecoach in the dust-choked town of Hamilton, her boots hitting the ground like she meant to stay. She squinted into the morning glare, clutching her carpet bag and trying not to think about how much smaller this place looked now than it had when she left 10 years ago. "Sheridan," a woman's voice called. Her sister, Clara, came hurrying across the street, skirts lifted from the dust, her golden curls bouncing. Sheridan's stomach twisted. Clara looked the same, soft, bright, and sweet. And beautiful. Always beautiful. Sheridan forced a smile. "Hey, Clara." Clara hugged her tightly. "It's been too long. I still can't believe you came back. I promised Pa I would." Clara's smile faltered. "I know. I miss him too." They stood in silence for a breath before Clara took Sheridan's arm and led her toward the livery where her wagon was hitched. Sheridan's eyes swept over the town news storefronts, a church now, fewer saloons. But the mountains still stood the same, tall and quiet. "You'll stay with me and the girls," Clara said. "They've been so excited to meet their aunt." Sheridan's throat tightened. "How old are they now?" "Josephine just turned 7. Juliet is 5. 2 girls. 2 little lives that Clara had raised on her own since her husband died in a logging accident 3 years back. Sheridan had sent money when she could, from the dress shop she managed in Helena, but she had not come home, not even when Pa died last winter. Guilt sat heavy in her chest. Clara's cabin sat a mile out of town, tucked between pine groves and wild rose bushes. It was small but tidy, with laundry fluttering on the line and 2 little girls chasing a chicken through the garden. "Josephine, Juliet," Clara called. "Come meet your Aunt Sheridan." The girls skidded to a halt and stared. Sheridan crouched and opened her arms. Josephine ran first, blonde like her mother. Juliet followed, darker-haired, grinning wide. Later that evening, after supper and baths, Clara poured 2 cups of coffee and joined Sheridan on the porch. Crickets hummed, and the stars were just beginning to show. "You really plan to stay?" Clara asked softly. Sheridan nodded. "I do. You look different," Clara said. "More serious." Sheridan looked out at the trees. "Running a shop alone in a city full of men'll do that." Clara hesitated, then said, "You know, Dawson Lee's still around." Sheridan's fingers curled around her cup. "You remember him, huh? Hard to forget someone who used to follow you around like a puppy." "He followed you too." Clara smiled faintly. "But he only watched one of us like that." Sheridan said nothing. Of course Clara would remember Dawson. Everyone did. Even as a boy, he had stood out tall, quiet, brown-eyed with that sure way about him, like he knew where he was going even if the world was falling apart. He had kissed Sheridan once, behind the grain mill, when they were 17. Then he disappeared off to Wyoming for a cattle drive, and came back a year later wearing a gun belt and smiling at Clara. Sheridan never asked him why. She did not see Dawson until 3 days later. She was in town, trying to find a seamstress who needed help, when her boot slipped on a loose board outside the mercantile. "Easy," a voice said, and a hand caught her elbow. She froze. He was broader now, sun-dark, a day's stubble on his jaw, and eyes that looked right through her. "Dawson," she said, surprised at how steady her voice was. "Sheridan." He let go slowly. "You're back." "I am." He nodded, like that was all he needed to hear. "Clara mentioned you might be." She looked down. Of course she did. He studied her face. "You're different." "So are you." They stood there for a long moment. Then he said, "You look tired." She laughed once dry. "Thanks. I mean it kindly. You always mean things kindly." "I try." She gave him a look, then stepped back. "Well, I should be getting home." He touched his hat. "Ride safe." "You too." But as she walked away, Dawson turned and watched her go. And he did not look away until she vanished down the path. That night, Sheridan sat on the porch again, watching fireflies as Juliet slept in her lap. Clara came out with a blanket and wrapped it around them both. "You saw him, didn't you?" Clara said softly. Sheridan did not answer. Clara sat beside her. "He was never mine, Sheridan. Even when I thought he might be. He always asked about you." Sheridan shook her head. "He kissed me once. Then he left. He left because you were planning to go to Helena. He told me that. Said he did not want to get in your way." Sheridan looked over. "He told you that?" Clara nodded. "You never asked." Sheridan breathed slowly. I always thought I was just the other sister. That's not how he saw it. 3 days later, Clara fell ill. A fever took hold fast, and within hours, she could barely lift her head. Sheridan called for the doctor, but he was out on a call in Derby, and there was no one else. Sheridan sat at her sister's bedside. The girls curled up asleep in the next room, and felt panic claw at her chest. At dawn, she saddled Clara's mare and rode hard into town, skirts flying, hair loose. She burst through the livery doors. "Dawson," she shouted. He stepped out from the stall, wiping his hands. "What happened?" "It's Clara. She's burning up. I do not know what to do." He did not hesitate. He grabbed his hat and rifle. "Show me the way." They reached the cabin in under 20 minutes. Dawson carried Clara to the sofa, doused cloths in cool water, and kept the girls calm while Sheridan sobbed in the kitchen, trying to boil willow bark tea with shaking hands. "She will pull through," he said that night, sitting beside Sheridan as she clutched her knees on the floor. "You do not know that." "Yes, I do. You always talk like you know everything." He smiled gently. "No, just the things that matter." She looked at him, eyes red, hair a mess, and whispered, "I am not the pretty sister." He leaned in close. "Sheridan," his voice caught. "You are the only one I cannot forget." She stared at him, stunned. Then she reached out, touched his face, and for the first time in 10 years, he kissed her again, slow, certain, like he had been waiting every single day. And this time, he did not leave. Clara's breathing steadied by the second evening. The fever had broken sometime after midnight, sweat soaking her shift as the worst of it passed. Sheridan had sat awake for most of it, knees drawn to her chest on the floorboards beside the bed, listening for each breath and watching the rise and fall of her sister's chest. Dawson had taken the girls out in the morning to give the room some quiet, returning only after he'd fed them and set them up with their slates and chalk on the front porch. Now, with the sun leaning westward beyond the pines, Dawson stood at the woodpile splitting logs. The sound of the axe striking clean through oak filled the stillness, steady and measured like everything he did. Sheridan came down the steps slowly, her apron still damp from wringing out cloths. "She asked for you," Dawson said without looking up. Sheridan wiped her hands on her skirt. "Did she seem clear-headed?" "Enough to tell me your tea tastes like boiled bark scraped off a barn door." Sheridan let out a breath, close to a laugh. "She's not wrong." He paused, resting the axe head in the stump. "You look worn out." "I'll sleep when I stop hearing her cough, even when she isn't." He straightened and turned to face her, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat. "You don't have to do this alone. I've done most things alone for a while now." He studied her. "Is that what you want going forward?" She crossed her arms. "What I want's never mattered much." "It does to me." Wind moved the branches above them, scattering needles across the path. Sheridan looked down at her boots. "I never understood why you didn't come back sooner," Dawson said, voice quiet. Sheridan didn't speak for a long moment. "Because I didn't know what good it would do. Pa was already sick. Clara had her own life. And he waited. I was ashamed," she said finally. "I left like I had something to prove. I came back with nothing but calluses and a bag of sewing needles." "You came back with yourself," he said. "That counts more than most things." She met his gaze. "You used to be a ranch hand. Now you're splitting wood for sick women and playing schoolmaster to 2 girls who barely come up to your belt." He nodded once. "Things change. Did you ever marry?" "No, why not?" He leaned against the axe handle. "Never got past one girl I kissed behind the mill." Her throat tightened. "That was years ago. Doesn't mean it stopped mattering. Maybe it should have." He shook his head once. "I don't believe in should." The back door creaked open. Josephine stepped out barefoot, Juliet on her heels. They both held a folded blanket between them. "Mama wants this," Josephine said. "She's cold again." Sheridan took the bundle and ran a hand over their heads. "Thank you, sweethearts. Stay with Mr. Lee for a little while?" "All right." Juliet nodded, already tugging Dawson's arm toward a stump. "Can we play horseshoes?" He glanced at Sheridan. "Mind if I stay a little longer?" She hesitated, then said softly, "Please do." By nightfall, Clara was sitting up sipping broth, her voice still rough, but her eyes clearer. Sheridan changed her linens and stepped outside again, pressing a hand to her lower back as she stretched. The moon hung low and full, casting silvery light across the yard. Dawson was still there, seated on the porch steps, his hat resting beside him. The girls had long gone to bed. He didn't look up as she approached, just shifted to make room. She sat beside him without speaking. For a while, they listened to the wind in the pines and the faint creak of the weather vane turning on the roof. "I didn't think I'd ever have this again," she said finally. "What's that?" "Stillness. A place to sit where nothing's demanding too much of me. You could have it every day." She folded her hands in her lap. "You say that like it's easy." "Not easy," he said. "Just possible." She leaned back against the post. "When you kissed me that day, I thought you'd come back for me." "I did." "No," she said. "You came back and watched Clara marry someone else." His jaw tightened. "I came back and saw you'd already packed your things." She turned her head sharply. "How did you? Your father told me. Said you were set on making your own way. Said if I really cared about you, I'd let you go." She stared at him. "And you listened?" "I thought I was doing the right thing." A long silence passed between them. "I didn't want you to let me go," she said. "I know that now." She looked at him, face unreadable in the moonlight. "Then ask me." He blinked. "Ask you what?" "If I'm staying." He turned, his eyes searching hers. "Are you?" She reached out, took his hand, and laced her fingers through his. "Yes." The porch stayed quiet after that, but something old and aching had slipped loose between them, and in its place was something steadier, like a beam fitted into a frame strong, sure, and meant to last. The morning after Clara could sit up on her own, Sheridan found herself kneeling in the garden, pulling weeds from between the rows of carrots. Her knees pressed into the damp earth, and the sun, not yet high, cast a pale gold wash over everything. The smell of soil and crushed green things clung to her hands. It steadied her, the work simple, direct. No guessing, no wondering where things stood. Juliet sat nearby sorting small stones by size into piles, humming tunelessly under her breath. Josephine helped Dawson tie a new wire fence around the chicken coop. Clara had insisted she could be left alone for a few hours, and had even folded her own quilt that morning without help. Sheridan brushed her hands off on her skirt and stood, stretching her back. Dawson glanced up from the coop just as Josephine pointed out a crooked post. He crouched to fix it, nodding as the girl explained something with her hands flying. Sheridan watched the pair, how easily he listened, how he gave her words weight, and something loosened behind her ribs. Later, as she washed carrots at the pump, Sheridan caught Josephine watching her from the porch steps. "You don't laugh much," the girl said. Sheridan raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Josephine nodded. "Mama laughs more. And Uncle Dawson." Sheridan wiped her hands. "I didn't know Dawson was your uncle." "He's not really, but we call him that. He fixed Mama's roof last fall and helped us chop wood when it snowed too early." Sheridan leaned on the porch rail. "He's good at taking care of things." Josephine rested her chin in her hands. "Did you love him before you went away?" The question knocked the air from her. "I." Sheridan ran a hand across her neck. "I was too young to know what to call it." The child's brow furrowed, then cleared. "I think you loved him. He looked at you different when you came back." Sheridan's voice caught. "It's not always that simple." Josephine shrugged. "Mama says nothing is." That evening, Sheridan walked with Dawson along the edge of the pasture behind the cabin, where the land sloped down into thick stands of fir and larch. The air was heavy with the scent of pine pitch, and the sky above turned lavender at the edges. "Clara said you've been helping out for a while," Sheridan said. "Since the winter after Mason passed." Sheridan glanced at him. "You and he were close?" "Well enough. He was decent. Worked hard. Loved her straight through." They stopped near the fence line where a hawk circled above. "She never told me much about him," Sheridan said quietly. "She didn't want you to worry." "I wish she had." Dawson leaned an elbow on the top rail. "You feel like you missed too much." "I did miss too much." He nodded once. "But you're here now, and they need you now." She looked at him, the angle of his jaw shadowed in the low light. "And what do you need, Dawson?" He swallowed. "I need to stop wondering if you'll leave again. I don't want to, but I don't know how to stop preparing for disappointment." He turned to face her. "Then let me carry some of that with you." She stepped closer. "I don't know if I remember how to be held." "Doesn't mean you can't learn." Something in her face shifted, uncertain, but open. She reached up, hesitated, then laid her hand flat against his chest. His heart beat steady beneath it. He didn't move, just let her feel it. They stood like that until the last light slipped from the sky. The next morning, Sheridan rose before the girls, dressed in her oldest work blouse, and walked into town. The general store had posted a small notice in the window. Dressmaker wanted fair wages, steady hands. She stepped inside, nodded to the owner, and asked to speak with the woman who ran the sewing room and back. By noon, she had worked 3 afternoons a week, mending mostly, with the promise of more once fall set in and the ranchers sent in their winter orders. She walked home slow, the sun warm on her shoulders, thinking about the way Dawson had looked at her the night before. Not with pity or longing, just quiet certainty. When she reached the cabin, Dawson's horse was tied out front. She passed through the door and found him kneeling beside the stove, lighting a fire under the kettle. The girl sat at the table drawing pictures with charcoal on old paper scraps. Clara rested in the rocker, one quilt draped across her legs, a second folded neatly beside her. Sheridan hung her shawl on the hook, then crossed to Dawson. "I took the job," she said. He stood, brushing ash from his hands. "Good. I'll be gone some afternoons. I'll be here." She looked up at him, then reached for his hand and didn't let go. "I'm not sure how this is supposed to go." He squeezed her fingers. "We make it up as we go." She stepped in, rested her forehead against his shoulder. He held her, not tight, not claiming, just enough to say he was there, and would be. Behind them, Juliet asked if she could draw a horse with wings. Clara said, "If you can dream it, you can draw it." Sheridan smiled into Dawson's shirt. "You're staying for dinner?" "Only if you're cooking." "Then you're cooking." He kissed her temple, hands still clasped in hers. "Deal." By early September, the last of the chokecherries had fallen, and the air carried the first bite of mountain frost in the mornings. Sheridan rose before the sun most days, tying her hair back with a strip of cotton and lighting the stove before the girls stirred. Clara had gained back most of her strength, but still needed rest by mid-afternoon. Sheridan didn't mind. The rhythm of it all, mending in town, hauling water, stitching hems by lamplight, settled into her bones like something she'd unknowingly longed for. Dawson came by near daily, but never without reason. He brought fence nails, a bundle of turnips from his winter store, a tin of lamp oil he said he had extra of. Sometimes he stayed through supper. Sometimes he didn't. But he always left her looking a little longer than he had any right to. One Sunday, when the sky threatened rain but never followed through, Sheridan joined Dawson at the edge of town for the last cattle drive of the season. He'd offered to teach Josephine and Juliet about branding, and Clara had waved them off with a warning not to let the girls near the fire. Sheridan stood with her arms folded outside the corral, watching Dawson guide one of the ranch boys through the process, his voice low and sure. The girls sat on a fence rail nearby, wide-eyed but quiet, just as he'd asked them to be. When he stepped away from the pen, brushing dust off his sleeves, she walked with him toward the hitching post. "You ever think about leaving again?" he asked, not looking at her. "Not for weeks now." "That's not a no. I don't feel restless the way I used to," she said. "I used to think if I could just get far enough away, I'd stop feeling like I was made out of sharp edges. And now," she met his eyes, "now I think I just needed someone who saw past them." He didn't answer right away. The sky had gone pale with evening, and the last of the cows were being driven across the flats to the holding yard near the tracks. "I never minded the sharp edges," he said finally. "They made you clearer." Back at the cabin, Clara sat darning socks beneath the open window. The girls trailed inside with wind-blown cheeks and dirt-smudged hands, chattering about calves and rope loops. Dawson followed last, carrying Juliet's shawl she'd left behind on the fence. That night, after the girls were put to bed and Clara had gone quiet in her room, Sheridan stepped outside and found Dawson sitting on the porch rail, one foot braced against the post. "You always end up out here," she said. "Habit." "Of what?" "Waiting." She crossed to him, arms wrapped around herself. "You don't have to anymore." "I know." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small tin box. He held it out to her, the look in his eyes unreadable. She took it, lifted the lid. Inside was a spool of silk thread, not the coarse kind she used for mending, but fine, pale blue, barely thicker than a strand of hair. "I saw it at the traveling store last week," he said. "Figured you wouldn't get it for yourself." Her breath caught. "Why blue?" "You wore a ribbon that color the day I kissed you behind the mill." She looked up at him, blinking hard. "I didn't know you remembered that." "I remember everything." She pressed the tin to her chest. Dawson. He stepped down from the rail. I don't want to wait anymore, Sheridan. Not for you to decide if you're worth loving, or for you to believe I'm not going anywhere. She stepped into him, her voice small and steady. Then don't wait. Just stay. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and kissed her with the quiet certainty of a man who had nothing left to prove. Inside, the firelight flickered against the window glass, and the wind shifted through the pines like a promise. The first hard frost came on a Wednesday. Sheridan woke early to find the garden rimmed in white. The leaves of the squash plants curled in on themselves like fists. The hens clucked low and restless in the coop, and the pump handle stung her fingers when she drew water. She wrapped a wool shawl around her shoulders and watched her breath rise into the morning air, thinking of the winter ahead. Inside, the girls were still asleep, their small forms curled under quilts Clara had mended herself last spring. Sheridan kept her steps quiet on the floorboards, pausing only to stoke the stove before heading out again with the milk pail. Dawson arrived by noon, wearing a wool-lined coat and leading a mule cart loaded with split firewood. He set to stacking it by the side of the house without a word, the rhythm of it steady and familiar. Sheridan joined him as soon as she saw the cart, wordlessly handing him a wedge when a piece jammed. You ever get tired of being useful? She asked, her breath misting between them. He adjusted the collar of his coat. Not if it means keeping the cold out of your walls. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the wind already lifting it again. I've been thinking about adding a lean-to out back. Somewhere to keep sewing through the winter without taking over the kitchen. You'll need good light. There's a south-facing wall with nothing on it. He nodded. I'll draw up something after supper. She hesitated, then asked, You really mean to spend the whole winter here? He didn't glance away. Unless you don't want me to. Her voice softened. I want you to build it with me. That night, Sheridan told Clara about the lean-to, laying out her plan with pencil sketches and measurements drawn on the back of an old flour sack. Clara sat at the table, her face lit by the oil lamp, eyes clear and quiet. You ever think you'd end up staying again? Clara asked. Sheridan looked at the drawing. No. But I think I always hoped I might. Clara reached across the table, resting her fingers over her sister's. Then build it. Make this place yours. The next days passed in steady rhythm. Dawson brought lumber from a neighbor's fallen shed. Sheridan sorted what could be salvaged and what needed planing. The girls helped where they could, gathering nails from the dirt or holding boards in place as Dawson hammered them into shape. By the second week, the frame stood square and strong, and Sheridan had begun imagining the shelves she'd line with folded muslin and thread tins. One evening, after the walls had been boarded and the roof tarped for the night, Dawson sat with Sheridan on the new stoop, the two of them wrapped in one of the cabin quilts. You ever regret the years we lost? She asked him. He turned toward her. Only when I think about how long I didn't get to hold your hand. She leaned into his shoulder. It used to ache, thinking of you with someone else. I never let it go that far. Why not? He looked down at her fingers curled in his. Because it never stopped being you. She touched his jaw, rough with the day's stubble. I want you to stay, Dawson. Not just through winter. Not just for the girls. For me. I already am. She kissed him, slow and sure, and when she pulled back, there was no doubt left in either of them. By the first snowfall, the lean-to was finished. Sheridan's sewing bench stood beneath a wide, paned window, her shears glinting in the weak winter light. The girls watched from the doorway as Dawson hung a small shelf for the spools, his hands careful not to split the wood. You gonna live here now? Juliet asked him, arms crossed. Dawson set down the hammer. If your aunt lets me. Josephine gave Juliet a look. She already does. Clara laughed from the stove, and Sheridan pressed her lips together to keep from doing the same. That night, they all sat around the table, Clara, the girls, Dawson, and Sheridan, bowls of stew warming their hands, the windows fogged with heat. Outside, snow fell in soft, steady sheets. Inside, the world felt full. Later, when the girls had gone to bed and Clara had retired early with an old copy of David Copperfield, Sheridan and Dawson stood in the doorway of the lean-to, watching snow gather along the eaves. Come spring, he said, we could plant again. Maybe run a few hens through the coop. Fix the fence line on the west side. Sheridan leaned against him. You're making plans. I'm making a life. She turned to face him, her hands on either side of his coat. Then let's make it together. He kissed her, slow and deep, and it tasted like warmth after cold, like home after too long wandering. They married in the spring, under a cottonwood tree that Clara insisted be decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. The girls wore dresses stitched from cotton Sheridan had dyed herself. The ceremony was small, just a few neighbors and the doctor who'd finally made it out that winter with a bottle of white wine and a smile as wide as the valley. Dawson built them a new bed frame from pine he'd felled himself. Sheridan sewed the quilt they slept under, each square cut from fabric scraps collected over the years. On warm nights, they left the window open and listened to the wind in the trees. On cold ones, he pulled her closer and whispered things he'd never learned how to say out loud before he found her again. Clara's health held strong through 2 more winters, long enough to see Josephine start school and Juliet read her first book aloud. Sheridan's sewing took off, her lean to becoming a hub for ranch wives and town girls alike. Dawson took up work with a nearby rancher, but always made it home before supper, mud on his boots and a twinkle in his eye that never faded. And through it all, they stayed side by side, hands often touching, laughter never far, their love not loud, but true. The kind built slow and steady, beam by beam, until it stood strong enough to weather anything. They lived that way for the rest of their days. Together. Always.